Hello, everybody, and welcome to Beyond Compatibility, the podcast where we explore what makes relationships truly work. I am Lucas, and here we talk about love, connections, and what keeps them strong. Whether you're single, in a relationship, or just curious about the dynamics of compatibility, there is something here for you. In this episode, I sit down with Rebecca Collins, a somatic intimacy coach helping couples and women break free from recurring relationship patterns to cultivate soulful, deeper connections. We dive into Rebecca's unique journey from marketing to coaching and how her personal healing shaped her work. Expect to learn about the transformative power of paths work and Tantra, how acceptance can dissolve inner resistance, and why relationships serve as a powerful mirror for personal growth. We also discuss the challenges of balancing individual needs with relationship harmony and how to create meaningful connections. Whether you're navigating your own relationship patterns or simply curious about fresh perspectives on connection, this conversation offers profound insights. Let's dive in. Welcome, Rebecca. How are you doing? How are you feeling today?
I am honestly feeling a little ill, but I'm excited to be here and to talk with you and play with these topics that we've started talking about.
Well, thank you very much for joining, even if you're starting to feel a little bit ill, and I hope that you get well soon.
Thank you.
For those who are listening to us but may not know you, what do you do professionally?
I'm a somatic intimacy coach, so I work with couples and with women who are looking to break their relational patterns. They've often been stuck in these cycles of recurring frustration or conflict in their relationships and want to learn a new way to be in partnership and to relate with people and open their hearts to this deeper kind of intimacy, like a very soulful kind of intimacy.
Okay, I hear that you help couples and women, but you don't work with men.
I work with men who are a part of a couple I'm working with, but currently I don't work one-to-one with men because it's so different from my lived experience.
Okay, so it's important that you have like first-hand experience, to support other people.
For me, I find that really beneficial. Yeah, a lot of my clients find that my ability to speak to the kinds of challenges they're facing directly from my own experience as well as from what I'm seeing in them is something that really helps them to move through.
Okay, that's really interesting. It's important that you feel that connection and that you feel that you saw in you some problems that they might be experiencing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like a deeper level of intimacy and empathy when I can feel it from my own lived experience as well.
Okay, that's great. So, how did you become a coach? What was the process that led you to become a coach? What's your background?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really winding journey. I was very reluctant to become a coach. So I started studying psychology and linguistics coming straight out of school. And then I went into marketing, and within marketing, I was working in communications, branding. They're the main threads, really trying to get clear on the message that people were trying to communicate and why that mattered to people. And in the background, I was just eternally fascinated by relationships and emotions. It was the kind of thing where I would often procrastinate on my job because I had something in my own relationship or had something in a friend's relationship. And I was like, what's going on here? And I was doing deep research. So it was always there in the background, but I didn't really consider it to be a viable career path. And I think part of that is I was seeing the coaching industry. I'd spent some time in Bali where every other person was a life coach. And part of me is just like, this is so much of this is bullshit. I had sales coaches coming to me and saying like, no, just, you don't need a certification. You don't need to be qualified. You're already so qualified just from the life you've lived. Pay me $7,000. I'll teach you to sell and you can be a coach. And that felt so out of integrity for me. So even though a part of me was like, I know that there's something in this for me, my resistance was like, I'm not going there. I don't want to be a part of that. And that was probably 7-8 years ago. And and it wasn't really until COVID. At the beginning of COVID, I'd been doing some executive coaching with my branding clients, my brand consultancy clients. So it was like starting to weave into my work. But at the beginning of COVID, all of my consulting clients went, well, not bankrupt, but like stopped all spending that wasn't critical for the moment. And I had this feeling of like, it's going to be difficult for me to build whatever I build in this moment in time. It may as well be something I really, really care about.
It must have been a very hard decision, like jump from corp, where probably you have more security or a job in marketing, and to jump to a coaching and supporting couples in their love life, right?
I mean, yes, but not because I had security. I had been working with startups, I'd been freelancing, consulting. So I had never really had that much security and stability in it. It was something that
Yeah,
was
the
always
startup world is like that.
exactly, exactly. It was like always enough to keep me surviving and to keep me alive. But because I didn't love it, I also wasn't trying to build it into this thriving thing. So it was stuck in this phase of survival rather than thriving. So the choice to leave was still scary and did still bring up that fear of insecurity, but not because of like a tangible or financial security that I'd had before, more because it was embracing something that was really meaningful to me and it's still a bit taboo. Especially, I work a lot with things that are a little bit more esoteric and more witchy, depending on my client's openness to it. And and I work a lot with sexuality and with Tantra and with these threads that we are really only just starting to talk about in the more mainstream
What do you
community.
think
So
is this
yeah.
is taboo still, the sex part? Talking about sex, talking about intimacy, and why do you think still a taboo nowadays?
It's hard to comment on this because in the circles that I'm now in, for which I'm very grateful, it's not taboo. We really do talk about this. There's open dialogue and it's very respectful and curious and exploratory. In many places, I believe that sexual liberation is very connected with liberation in general. It's very difficult to be connected with your sexual power and to be disconnected from your sense of power in the world, from your sense of conviction about what you believe is good for people, for the planet, all of these things. If you're truly, truly connected with your sexual energy, not just with the expression of sex in the world, but with your sexual energy, you're much more deeply connected with truth and with life.
Well, that sounds profound, and we'll get into that in a bit. So I hear that you're following your passion, and you help couples, you help individuals, women, to get more in touch with themselves, with their own sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
but and ultimately to heal some of the wounds they have. And I saw in your Instagram profile, in a beautiful post where you describe a lot of things that you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
that you are being in a healing journey for almost a decade.
Yeah, just over a decade now.
What's over the decade? Well, that's amazing. But how were these 10 years of healing? What do you understand by healing, and What's the most surprising thing you found about yourself during these 10 years?
Wow. Uh, it's been messy. Yeah, it's
Messy.
been again like a really winding journey that I couldn't have predicted from the beginning. It started for me with what I could only call, I guess, a breakthrough moment 10 years ago when I was suicidal or had suicidal ideation anyway, because I was so out of alignment with what was true for me. And I had no idea of how to make it better, what I could possibly do, what better even was. Like I was so disconnected from what I could even want. I could have been in a room of every possible resource, everything I could possibly have desired, and I wouldn't have been able to recognize the feeling of wanting it. I was just so disconnected. I could probably speak for an entire podcast series about, like the 10 years and all the different threads that have come through. But I guess what has been most surprising for me is in these more recent years, the lesson is really shifted from fixing something or changing something to just learning to be with it. And it's so simple.
Okay,
It's
that's
like
interesting.
it's like something that I've heard in many different forms of just like the path is acceptance. But I've really started to feel what that means. And that unlocks so much. And I think I'd had this fear for a long time that if I accepted things about myself that were out of alignment, then I would forever stay out of alignment. And I would never really have what I wanted and I would never really feel good. And it's the exact opposite. It's like the acceptance melts it and it no longer needs to hold on.
What were the things you were not accepting on yourself that now you accept?
I'll share a very intimate one. I was recently in a tea ceremony and I love these spaces. It's like a 1 hour silent ritual. We sit, we all drink tea together. It's very, very ceremonial and intentional in the way the tea is served. And normally when I'm in those spaces, it's profound for me. I'm so dropped in and connected with myself. And I feel like this connection with spirit, and like messages are coming through me. It's, like kind of like magic that you get a little bit ego trippy on because you're like, yeah, this is so cool. And you get very attached to it. And this day I was so not there. I was like in my head, I was thinking about business things that I needed to do. So one layer of it was just accepting that's like after, I don't know how long it was, but let's say 10 minutes of sitting there trying to convince myself to be like, no, we're like being intentional and serene and all of these things. Like, no, I'm not. I'm in my head right now. That's what's happening. I'm in my head. The intimate layer of it is that another thought that came up was a part of me was being really judgmental about how I looked. Not necessarily in that moment. I think I'd seen a photo of myself or something like this just before going into ceremony. And part of me was like being very critical, thinking I looked ugly and really unattractive. And instead of what my like early stage self-love teachings would have said, which is like, no, you're beautiful. There's so many wonderful qualities about you, et cetera, et cetera. I was just like, okay, you think I look ugly right now? Cool. I didn't try to push it away. I was just like, all right, that's what's going on for you right now. And it almost like it's almost like this part of me. I do a lot of work with parts, so I'm using this language a lot. There was this part of me that had that thought. And as soon as I just reflected what it was saying without trying to change it or force it to think something else or force it to change its belief system, it was like, oh, okay. Like, you're not reacting to me. You're not giving me any, you're not like throwing any energy into this. It's just being with it. And then the thought faded.
Okay, so it's kind of that you distance yourself from yourself, and you hear your body or your thoughts talking, and you
Yeah.
accept that they are there.
Yeah. Can I give a little context to parts work?
Yeah,
Just explain it.
definitely.
Yeah. So the idea is that within us, we have all of these different, you could think of them as characters or voices or just like needs or desires that are attached to a particular emotion. And if you imagine it as a character, it's supportive. So you can imagine you have the inner critic is one that we talk about a lot, right? The inner critic, the inner child. And when we're really, really attached or enmeshed with those voices, we think it's like, this is what I think. This is my entire worldview. But when we create a separation, we're like, okay, this is a character. There's this part of me that has this story, this belief, this need, this feeling, whatever it is. And I still have my anchored self. We can kind of relate from that anchored self. And part of the reason I think this is so powerful is that when we're willing to stay with it and hear what it has to say, on a like the subtext of that is saying, I know that I'm bigger than this. Like I know that myself is bigger than this thought, so that I can hold it as a part of my system, not as like, oh my God, if I let this thought in, it will take over. It will be all I can think and all I can feel. It's like, no, I can just hear it as though it's one little character that's coming in to tell me what's going on for it. But I know that I can hold that and I can hold the others too.
Well, I understand. And there were thoughts that popped up about your physical appearance,
Hmm.
and because I'm thinking in a girl that may have been or may have these thoughts, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
how was the process for you to get the tools to be able to manage or to handle those voices?
My honest answer is that I don't know. I wasn't intentionally trying to do that. It sort of like happened through me doing multiple other things, but also through the practice of doing it, right? The practice of learning, a stage of it is learning parts work. This comes from a methodology called internal family systems. So studying that and then working with it in my tantric training as well was supportive in me just getting the principle in my mind. And then starting to be like, okay, let me listen to the easier voices. For me, it's easy to listen to sadness. It's easy to listen to disappointment. They're like the kind of deflated emotions are easy to talk to because I'm not scared of what they'll do. Some of the others are more like powerful and trying to inspire you to action. There, I have more resistance, or I have had more resistance around those. But yeah, the practice of starting to hear some of those voices, and then through meeting them and being able to be with them, one of the first things I learned is if I'm struggling to love a part of myself, it's because I'm trying to pull the love from me as like a closed system. Like if I'm just struggling to love it or accept it, it's thinking that I have to have that capacity to love within me. And sometimes I'm like, there are like, I could list out hundreds of flaws about myself. And it's like a lot to be able to just kind of be with them all and to be fine with it if I'm trying to love them just from me. So if I'm struggling to love a part of me, the message for me is to reconnect with something bigger, For me, I might call it source or the universe or nature even, but to reconnect with a place where we're just inherently loved. Like nature isn't questioning whether we're lovable. And if I reconnect with
That's
that sense of
profound.
source, yeah. So when I reconnect with it, I'm
I
like, it's not
had
me loving the thing. It's me realizing that I am loved and that I have always been loved.
that's it's very interesting and profound, and because I had the feeling when I check, for example, social media or some sort of yoga philosophy, that sometimes, and you correct me here if I'm wrong, I'm not an expert on this, but I have the feeling that sometimes we want to kind of exclude part of the human nature, the ugly
Mm-hmm.
feelings,
Mm-hmm.
the envy, jealousy, some negative feelings about ourselves,
Yeah.
and we just want to exacerbate the good part of it.
Yeah.
And I had a feeling that, I mean, if we are here, we are meant to live the whole human experience, the good and the bad. And from what I hear from you, and correct me here if I'm wrong, is that you are having full acceptance from the bad part as well. I have a negative thought, and I accept it.
I mean, I'm flattered by that reflection. I definitely wouldn't say that I have full acceptance, but I have the intention towards acceptance. Yeah, and
Okay.
this is actually something that I picked up again in more recent years when I went into studying Tantra. Because if we can give a definition to Tantra, it's kind of the capacity and the willingness to be with any aspect of the human experience and to not make one aspect better than another and to welcome them all in as just inherently valuable, worth feeling, and approach them with that openness. Like bring it with open arms, and not to say like, yeah, I want to feel suffering all the time, let me like drown in my suffering, but to allow it to be and to feel it.
That's so interesting. And I think it's a practical tool. As you mentioned, if you allow it to go through you, it lives faster.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. I think everyone should have a look at this concept, at these thoughts.
Yeah.
So coming back to the people that approach you for coaching, couples, women, what is the profile of the people that knock your door for support?
The word that came to me is that they feel stuck, that they have
Just
been, they're like, I have seen this pattern, I have run this pattern so many times, I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore. Whether that's like fighting, a lot of the time I see people who are like fighting for love, like they're stuck in this pattern of conflict, but what they're really trying to do is be like, love me, can you please just love me in the way that I need to be loved, can you please see me, can you please hear me, can you please show me you care, can you show me I matter. And they've been
this
trying to
is what happening
communicate.
between couples.
Yeah, yeah. um, and and they've been trying to communicate that in many different ways using strategies that they probably learned when they were kids. Most of the time we learn these strategies when we're kids, when we're trying to get that love from our parents or our caregivers, and it's not working. And there's a deep pain in that. There is a pain in being there next to someone you love and have loved often for many years and feeling like they're not, often in those moments what we're thinking is that they don't want to give us what we need, or perhaps that they can't give us what we need. And there's like this powerlessness and this hopelessness. So often what I'm teaching or helping people to rediscover in those moments is their own power. I love the phrase coming home to yourself, coming home to your own power, because we get stuck. Like when we're in that tension point with another person, so much of our attention is going out onto them. We're like, why are they doing this? How do I make them do something different? Like it's all there. And meanwhile, there is this like wounded, in pain, crying, sad, grieving part of us that's like hiding in a corner. We think we're fighting to get the attention we need from our partner, but really like we're ignoring that part of ourselves. So it's like in those moments, how do you turn your attention back inwards to meet yourself in the places where you really, really need to be met and loved and held and seen and heard? How do you show yourself that you matter in those moments? And then we start working on the dynamics
That's
between the people.
okay. So I understand that firstly, you talk with the individuals to help them dig down and understand their needs and where those needs are coming from before you jump into the dynamics in between the relationship.
Not quite. So I will generally work with the couple first because the philosophy I hold and that many other people hold is that the relationship is a mirror. Not just our romantic partnerships, but our relationships everywhere are mirroring ourselves. So I like to look at the dynamic of the relationship. I can see from the way the two people interact, even if it's nonverbal, from the way that two people are interacting in the body. I can see a lot about what they're holding individually, where they're struggling to lean into intimacy, where they're holding resentment, things like that. And we get to witness the fundamental pattern that's happening in the relationship, the core like tension point. And normally when we find that pattern, we'll see that that's a pattern that they've played out in every previous relationship in their lives, or most of them, at least. It tends to be a very familiar pattern. So this is where we see it's not just because of those two people. It's their individual stuff that they're carrying through. And this relationship is mirroring it to them and saying, this is your invitation to shift that, to let it go, to see what's going on here, to see what needs to be released, to see what you can alchemize. I love the concept of alchemy. So it's seeing the relationship as this like sacred mirror, spiritual initiation that's inviting you to alchemize those patterns. So we look first at the relationship, and then depending on the state of the relationship, we'll either do that kind of deep healing work individually, but with both people in the room. If the relationship is in a fairly healthy place, you can do that deep healing work very effectively with both people in the room, and it brings a lot of empathy into the container. But if there is resentment or disconnect or like some kind of deep rupture that's happening in the relationship, it's not quite safe enough generally to do that with two people in the same space, in my experience. So I prefer to do a mixture of working individually and together.
Can you put an example of a problem that a couple might be facing that comes back to a previous relationship or previous relationships?
Yeah. Yeah. So a very common pattern is around self-abandonment, or to put it in simple words, those moments when we neglect our own needs or our own desires to try and hold on to the relationship. So you often find that both partners are doing this in some way, and it happens really early on. If you get really conscious about if this is your pattern, if you get really conscious during the process of dating, you'll start to see these tiny little moments very early on where you're choosing not to say something because you're worried how it might impact the dynamic that's going on between the two of you. So when that happens over a long period of time, you get to the stage in a relationship, often around like 3 years in, where you're like, my needs are not being met here. This is a huge problem. And often unconsciously, we're carrying a whole bunch of resentment at this point in time because we're like, you don't care about my needs. That's why my needs are not being met. You don't understand me. That's why my needs are not being met. We make up those stories, right? And from that place of resentment, we start bringing up our needs, where it's really like demands. And it's like, you have to meet me here, or I'm going to be so unsatisfied that I'll leave the relationship, whether you're saying that literally or just in the subtext. So at this point in time, the process that we'll often work through is to see, once we see that that pattern is happening in the dynamic, that I'll do individual sessions with both people to start clearing out the layers of resentment and to start noticing what are the points in time when you're choosing to not bring something up. Where does that problem actually start? And in that moment, what are you feeling? Like what's happening in your body? We often lead from the body in that moment. So it's like, okay, go back into that moment where you've chosen not to say something. What were you feeling in your body? Where was your attention in your system? What were the stories and beliefs that were coming up at that moment in time? And then we can start to trace maybe where they come from. Often they come from childhood stuff. Sometimes it's useful to go there and to clear out some of the dynamic with the parents or things like that. Other times you can just stay in that moment and be like, what do you really need in that moment for you to have the courage or have the capacity to bring your need or your desire or your boundary into the conversation? What would it take? What resource do you need to draw on from within yourself, from around you, to start choosing to show up differently in those little moments rather than abandoning yourself?
That's so interesting. And I have a lot of questions, but the first one that comes to my mind is when you have a partner, a relationship, a monogamous relationship, somehow we have the understanding that we need to make some concessions in order to keep the relationship together. Of course, we have individual needs, but sometimes we need to neglect our individual needs in order to make it work, the couple, the relationship.
Who told you that story? That we need to sometimes neglect our individual wants and needs to make the relationship work.
So I believe that, for example, if you have a single life, you are like living a life as a single, and you are dating a lot of different people, but in the moment you date, you start a relationship and a monogamous relationship with someone, then you cannot date any other people. And you can see, at least in the social media world, but also my friends, that I don't know, if my partner is looking at other girls or other guys, then I get jealous or I get defensive. Or so after some iterations in which you see your partner feeling upset because you saw or paid attention to another girl in the street, or this classical meme, like of the guy looking at the girl, like it's an old meme actually, but so the thing is that because of the discomfort that our partner feels, we start adapting to that to some extent. And if there
Yeah.
is something that I'm going to do that is going to make my partner feel insecure or jealous or, I don't know, scared or annoyed in some sense, maybe I don't do it. It's part of the concessions, like concessions that we make in order to keep the relationship together in a healthy way. So my question is in this frontier, in this border, in when, because I understand that if we keep our needs for long periods of time and we don't express them and we don't fulfill them, that brings resentment. But on the other side, if we do whatever we want, we can push that discomfort to our partnership. So I wanted you to maybe if you can give some thoughts about this border, this frontier. When should we put ourselves first and when the relationship first?
Yeah. It's an excellent question. I what comes to me is that when we're looking at that choice, we're generally not looking at it cleanly. So we're thinking, I have to do this because it's going to upset my partner if I don't. When what is really going on is a choice between a part of me. Again, parts work here is super useful because you can have a conversation with the different parts of you that have different desires. It's often how you get unstuck in these situations. So you're like, there is a part of me that really wants to go and flirt with this other person. Which, if you're monogamous and that's outside of your boundaries, then you've kind of made your commitment in advance, right? But you're saying there's a part of me that wants to do this, and there's a part of me that cares about how my actions impact my partner, right?
Correct.
So this is again like turning your attention inwards rather than outwards on your partner, because otherwise you're thinking, I want to do this, but my partner says my partner is making me do this, or my partner thinks is stopping me from doing it. When really what we're doing is maybe we're choosing ease. Maybe we're like, I don't want to fight with my partner. I don't have the capacity or the courage right now to have a difficult and honest conversation about my desires. So I'm going to choose to move the desire away instead. You're choosing the ease or whatever the underlying reason for your decision is. Does that make sense?
I understand the
Yeah.
part that you have two conflicting voices, one that tells you to care about your partner and their needs, and the other one is to take care about your own needs. You know, like
Yeah. And then there's probably a third one that's like, I don't want to deal with the consequences of not caring for my partner's needs.
correct, correct.
Yeah.
It's all
So,
internal.
yeah. So all of these little voices are playing a game, and we're often not conscious of those voices that are playing out. And one of them, whichever one is strongest or most neglected and wants to burst out, will win in the moment. But if you get conscious about it and you're looking at all three of them, you're like, okay, is there a way to tend to your different needs? If this part of you that's like, I'm in a monogamous relationship, but I really want to be able to flirt with other women, if you can go in and connect with that part and be like, why are you wanting this? What are you imagining that this will give to you? What like needs or desires will that fulfill for you that are currently going unmet so that you're feeling unsatisfied here? And you can then like make a decision from your grounded self about whether that's something you want to take on as like guidance for how you need to adjust your life and bring your life more into alignment, which might be having a conversation with your monogamous partner and saying, hey, our agreements are not currently fulfilling me completely. And I want to explore whether this is
Difficult
something
conversation, eh?
explore. Yeah. Yeah. And it may be that you're just realizing, hey, my current self is no longer compatible with the relationship that I'm in or the relationship that we've created. Or you might go and talk with this part of you and you might realize, hey, this is like a bit of me that got blocked in teenagehood that has some, this is a fairly common example, that has some stories and some pent up frustration and insecurity and shame about how I wasn't able to pick up men or women when I was a teenager. And this part of me is still there and it still really wants to prove that I can do that now. It's like, yeah, I'm like bigger now and I have more resources and I want to be able to go and flirt with these people so that I can see that I can do it now and I can prove that I can do it now.
Do
You
you think
know,
that happens more to men or to women? That's a particular example.
I I don't know my bias here. Honestly, I would say like I have seen it a lot more in men than in women, and I think that is also because we socialize men to like conquer women. So if there was a phase where they were not good at doing that, there's a part of them that's like, I need to prove myself as a man. It's understandable that story would exist.
So to prove yourself as a man, kind of you need to be successful with women. That's
It's a
the
story
story
that
that I get.
we've fed a lot of men. Yeah. Yeah. So that's why talking to the parts, like hearing them and being like, what's your desire here? What's going on for you? Why does this matter to you? Can help you either to set a boundary around how you behave from a more from a place of integrity, because you're like, I don't want my life ruled by my teenage self. Or
Right.
you could be like, this is actually a really true desire. This is like something that is very soulful to me, that is just like me hearing from a deeper part of myself what would make my life feel more aligned and fulfilling and satisfying. And I need, for me to be like fully fulfilled, I need to create space to live in alignment with that. There's no like blanket rule there. We need to talk.
No, I see. No, I see, and I feel the complexities of that conversation when you
Mm.
talk with your partner and you hold up your needs and you say, hey, I want to do this, and I know that it's something that we didn't sign up for at the beginning, we didn't agree, but we changed,
Yeah,
and I want to do it. It takes a lot of vulnerability to say that.
totally. Yeah, because you're risking rejection, you're risking loss
Do you
for the
think you
sake of
can?
being true to yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think after you render, you put that conversation in the table, can
Yeah.
you back off, or kind of if your partner reacts so badly, like, yeah, I want to fulfill some need with another person, and my partner reacts so badly to that, can I say, okay,
Mm.
it's fine, like I'm not going to do it? Can you actually roll it back, or you are
Yeah.
sold by then?
Whether they trust you is going to depend on how true what you're saying is. So if you're like, okay, I'm going to continue lying, I'm going to go back to pretending that this doesn't exist in me, I'm going to suppress this part of me because I'm afraid to lose what we have here. If it's coming from that energy, they're not going to trust you. They're going to be like, it's still there. At some point, it will explode out. Maybe it will explode out without you telling me. But if
Yeah.
you're like, okay, now I've received more, I've seen your reaction here, I've felt you, I've taken this into my system, and I've taken this into account with my desire. And I'm like, you know what? This desire is not something I need to fulfill in this lifetime. And if that's like really true, like if you can look yourself in the eyes, in the mirror, and you're like, I know this is true, then I think, yes, you can come back from it. Because that
Yeah.
again is like just you being like, cool, more information has come in and now I've changed again and again and again and again.
Or also, I'm thinking I'm feeling that situation in which you say this, I'm not going to fulfill this in my life. I think this is a very healthy thing. We live in a world where we
Mm-hmm.
have infinite options
Mm-hmm.
for careers, lives, partners, and
Totally.
eventually we need to say there are lives, most of them, that we are not going to live.
Yeah.
It's a painful process, but it's necessary. Because
Yeah.
if you don't rule it, if you don't govern it, then it gets random. You stop doing things that you wanted randomly. Someone takes
Mm-hmm.
over. The system takes over. The universe takes over if you don't render that.
Yeah.
But I was thinking in another thing, that you need to be courageous enough to say that you have those needs, but maybe one of the response is that your partner also have those needs, and maybe you feel insecure if your partner is doing the same.
But I am sure that has happened. Yeah. Yeah.
it's another voice, right?
I mean, it's an interesting reflection. It puts you in an interesting spot where you're like, okay, why why was it okay with me doing it and not okay with them doing it? Which honestly, in the context of non-monogamy, is very common because emotions are messy and complicated. Like a lot of people can experience believing fundamentally non-monogamy is a great idea and knowing that they want it for themselves, and then experiencing that if their partner engages with someone else, it's hugely confronting for them because they're like, wait, I thought I really believed in this. Why am I struggling so much? It's a really challenging experience.
No, definitely, and that leads me to the
Mm,
next topic, because you are supporting. You said in your profile that you are BDSM and ENM friendly.
mm-hmm.
So you are also supporting couples that are non-monogamous.
Yeah.
So what are the challenges you see in between the monogamous and non-monogamous couples?
The the biggest challenges I see are not necessarily like the most common ones that exist. I mean, I do think actually it's incredibly common, this one, but it tends to come up once and be a really big problem, which is that we often lie about what we're okay with because our minds or our egos or whatever you want to call it is like, this is what I believe in. But our heart is not necessarily there yet. These different parts of us move at different paces. So I often see people saying, I'm cool with it, you go and do that. And they're not cool with it. They want to be cool with it. And when it happens, and then they're really hurt or they're really angry, that emotion is connected with their partner and the actions that their partner took, but it's really not their partner's fault at all because they were there saying, yeah, go do this thing. So it's like this really deep pain that is caused by us betraying ourselves, but it looks like something our partner did. And that gets so complicated in the mind because like our emotion attaches to being like, I'm mad at my partner hurt me, etc. And it's like, no, your lack of self-honoring caused that pain.
Wow. I, yeah, I believe that it's challenging because, especially if you are in the ENM, the ethical non-monogamy,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the things that your partner can do, you cannot agree upfront. You don't
Mm-hmm.
can't really know how you're going to feel before that event happened. So I
Yeah.
understand that, yeah, you can be okay uh, theoretically, but on the practice, then when it happens, it's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And this comes back to what we were talking about before about being really honest about your needs and having to stay honest, even if you're scared about the impact that might have. Even if you're afraid that's like, oh, but if I don't give my partner the freedom to go and do that as soon as possible, then maybe they'll leave me. And it's like, well, you're already leaving yourself if you're not honest in the process.
It's tough. It's tough. I feel the complexity of all the things. And
Yeah.
may I ask your personal experience with polyamory?
Yeah. So I was in I wouldn't call it poly, but I was in a non-monogamous relationship for 6 years, my previous relationship. And previously I had like dated a man who was in an open relationship, but I never really considered it to be a choice that, I think even like a choice that I could make. Just somewhere in my mind, I was like, it's a thing that other people do. Like, I wasn't even considering it. So when I started dating this partner, he was already non-monogamous. He wasn't partnered, but he only wanted to build from a foundation of non-monogamy. And I knew that there was something in it for me. I kind of knew on an intuitive level. I'm like, okay, I've been around it enough times. There's probably something for me to discover. But my mind needed to see the data. So I made a spreadsheet. I made a Gantt chart of my entire relationship history, starting from like when I was 16, my first ever boyfriend. And I looked, and all the like messiest parts of this chart, I was like, these are messy because I was trying to fit them into a context of monogamy. I didn't know anything else. So it was like unreconcilable. And in a context of non-monogamy, it still would have been challenging. I didn't have the delusion that it would have just been fine, but it would have been reconcilable. Like, it would have known how to have the conversations, you know? So anyway, I was like, let's go into it. We were mainly, we said we were descriptively open. It's like, if you look at our relationship and how we're acting, you'd call it an open relationship. There was a phase where it was more like polyamory
What's the
for
difference?
6 months. So during that phase, I basically had a secondary partner who, yeah, like, I don't think we used this label, but like, we were talking every single day. It was a very intimate connection, which I've realized is, if I relate with people, I like it to be intimate and romantic and emotionally involved. Like, that's the context in which I like building relationship. I'm not really interested in purely sexual or casual or friends with benefits type dynamics. It doesn't nourish me in any way. Yeah, a lot happened in 6 years. That's my that's my summary.
No, I see. But what you mentioned that, because I have a confusion in between ethical non-monogamy, polyamory, and open relationship.
Okay.
What would you say is the difference in between the three concepts?
So if you consider, if we make like a quadrant, so you've got one axis that's like sexual physical intimacy, and another axis that's like romantic emotional intimacy. Yeah. So an open relationship is generally that you'll have some kind of freedom for physical and sexual intimacy with other people in a more casual kind of context, while moving into polyamory is bringing in the romantic and emotional intimacy, perhaps even commitment, like potentially having committed relationships with multiple people. They may look different, but there's that level of like, we're in a relationship with multiple people. And then ethical non-monogamy is just the umbrella term for, there are actually like probably 40 different labels within it, but ethical non-monogamy is the umbrella for anything that's not monogamy. And it's a bit contentious having the ethical in there now, because it's like, why are we not labeling ethical monogamy? You know, non-ethical non-monogamy would be having an affair.
That's true.
Like, yeah.
No, I see. And from your profile, I saw that now you're more monogamish. Um,
Mm.
how has your perspective on monogamy and non-monogamy evolved? And what's currently drawing you towards this monogamish term? And what is monogamish? Essentially?
I'm still figuring that out. So what I got to coming out of my last relationship was realizing that non-monogamy takes a lot. Well, I realized this in the relationship. Non-monogamy, for most people, and definitely for me, takes a lot of energy. And I use takes very intentionally. It's like really drawing the energy out of you as individuals, out of the relationship. And it can also give energy, But for me, the balance was not there. Like the freedom to form multiple relationships for me seemed more like a distraction than a nourishing aspect of my life. By the time I was at the end of the relationship, it wasn't necessarily true the whole time. And I came into having a more, I'd never gotten into a relationship before with any kind of intentionality, which I think is most people's stories, but I feel a little embarrassed to say it given the work that I do. But all of my relationships had come through meeting someone and getting hooked on someone and then ending up in a relationship with them, like ending up attached to them before we could even put the label of relationship necessarily. So it's like I had created a relationship internally before thinking about whether it was really able to give me what I wanted and needed. And that's because I didn't know what I wanted and needed in partnership. And coming out of this relationship, I made a very clear decision of never again entering into a relationship without that level of intentionality. And yeah.
How can you know the what are your needs? Because you mentioned, and I believe this happens to so many people, is sometimes when we are talking about boundaries or intentionalities, it's not that how we need to communicate them, but how we understand what they are. How can we
Yeah.
know more about our own needs and what we
Yeah.
want?
Yeah. A pretty reliable method is to look at our frustrations. So frustrations will reveal to us our unmet needs. They won't reveal to us our met needs. So to give an example, coming out of this relationship, what I realized is that it's very important for me, for my relationship to be a net contribution to my community, to the people around me, to the people I serve in the world. It needs to be, I need to be better able to serve in those places and to contribute in those places through being in the relationship than through not being in the relationship. If it takes away, or even if it's just neutral, I'm like, this is not a good indicator for me. And to come back to the previous question of why I moved away from non-monogamy, this was part of that reason. Like, it's not that I fundamentally disagree with non-monogamy, it's that I saw that it was drawing my attention to more selfish places, either just for me or for the relationship, rather than contribution beyond us. So I want the relationship to be a platform for contribution in the world. And it was a pain that I really felt when we were in the more challenging phase of our relationship, and a place where I could feel I was out of alignment. So that was me like looking at my frustration and then seeing what's the underlying like value that's being revealed by this frustration and misalignment in my life. That makes sense?
Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense. Wow, I mean, there's a lot of things in there. I believe the complexity, and I think it sounds really good. You know, like when you talk, this idea of aligning your relationship towards a bigger goal as well, the community, making an impact and helping others. That's not, it's. I mean, it landed really good on.
Mm.
So it's
Thank
really
you.
cool.
Mm.
Sounds very interesting. I need to
Mm.
say. We are heading to the ends of the interview, and
Mhm.
I wanted to say thank you, Rebecca,
Mm.
because you are helping people to connect, to be more intimate, relationship, monogamous relationship, people that are in open relationships, non-monogamous relationships that they want to explore through kink, through BDSM, and you are hitting in a problem that it's happening across the board. I recently saw some statistics on how many people are disconnected, couples that are breaking up, divorces, people having relationships that are unhappy. So the fact that you're putting your creativity, your intelligence, your passion towards helping others, I think it's something that needs to be called out, and I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
How people can find from you?
My main platform right now is Instagram. I am instagram.com/introspective. It will be in the show notes for the specific spelling. And you can feel free to DM me there. I'll be launching a group program on the intimacy of domination and submission at the beginning of the year. It starts at the beginning of the year, so I'm launching it very soon. It's called Melt, because that for me is the essence of all of this work. It's like, how do you melt your system open into a deeper level of intimacy, receptivity, attunement, awareness? It's like magic moment of two people merging into one for that experience in that moment in time. So that experience is designed for couples or play partners, because it'll be online. So you need to have someone else in the room. So you can reach out to me about that or follow me on Instagram and I'll share it there.
We'll put the links in the description of the episode.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Likewise. Thank you for...
And also thanks to you for listening to Beyond Compatibility. I really hope this episode gave you new insights to deepen your connections and reflect on what truly matters in your relationships. If you found value in today's conversation, please consider sharing it and subscribing so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep exploring what makes us truly compatible, changing the way we relate, one conversation at a time.